was I before?
No.
Okay. Hi, everyone.
I need to have your picture and everyone's going, can you see him? Can you see him?
Could you hear me?
Jeez, I can't see him. I don't know, I just texted and
I can
said,
see
can
him.
you hear him?
All right. So I apologize for that. We now have a visual, which is probably pretty scary, but that's the way it is when you get old. So we have this unfolding of events with Jacob and Esau, and now they've come back together after 16 years, and Esau has welcomed Jacob back. He's embraced him, and he's loving him, and they're going to return now to the land from which Jacob came from. Jacob's going to be bringing his wives and his maidservants and all of his sons, and he's going to share the land with Esau. So Esau is not in the direct line of genealogy to the Messiah. Jacob is, and Jacob is actually named Israel, and his sons will be the founding fathers of the 12 tribes of Israel. Esau goes about his own way, and he actually is an Edomite, and an Edomite is a worshiper of a pagan god, which we will see, interestingly enough, when we look at the Exodus. The Pharaoh was a worshiper of this god. It's very interesting how it all ties together. But we have, in chapter 36, Esau's descendants. Now, I'm not going to go through it all for several reasons. All the ones that know me know that I can't pronounce these names anyway. But I will tell you why it's there. It's there because Esau is, in fact, an offspring of Isaac, and so therefore he is revered, and God does bless him, and he does bless his descendants, and they do establish a nation. To this day, they're in the Middle East, in Palestine, but it is a nation that is constantly at war with the Israelites. So it's it's almost like that whole event around Ishmael. So you have an opposing piece, brothers that oppose, and for generations, those families become nations, and those nations battle each other. So very interesting dynamic that we see here. But 36, which is a considerable chapter, outlines all of the descendants of Esau and the rulers of Edom, because they established what is called the Edomite nation. And you see the rulers of Edom predate the kings of Israel, because this is before the 12 tribes have been established. So that's chapter 36. Is probably the quickest I've ever gone through a chapter in my life, but that's what it is. 37 is where we'll start tonight, and this begins with Joseph's dreams. Now we know that Joseph is an offspring of Jacob, i.e. Israel, and he was also the only son of his beloved Rachel, and he's also the youngest son. So there are a lot of things here that differentiate Joseph in a big way, right? And remember, when we talk about Jacob and Esau, Esau was Isaac's favorite, and Rebekah loved Jacob most, right? So there's a lot of similarities as we go through the generations. But now we're looking at Joseph in 37. And Jacob lived in the land where his father had stayed, the land of Canaan. And this is the account of Jacob. Joseph, a young man of 17, was tending the flocks with his brothers and sons at Bela, and the sons of Zepheth, his father's wives, and brought their father a bad report about him. Now Israel loved Joseph, Israel being Jacob, right, renamed as we know, more than any of the other sons, because he had been born to him in an old age, and he made a richly ornamented robe for him. It's not only that he was born to him in the old age, he was the last born, or the youngest of the 12, but he was also from Rachel. And Rachel had died at this point. Leah was still alive. Rachel was departed. When his brothers saw that their father loved him more than any of them, they hated him. They could not speak a kind word to him. Now remember who we're speaking of. These are the fathers of the 12 tribes of the nation of Israel. So, like all mortal men, they have their issues too. Even though they're the fathers of the 12 tribes of Israel, you would think, oh my goodness, as patriarchs of this nature, you put them on a pedestal. Well, no, you don't. They're mortals, just like every one of us, and they do things that are unrighteous as well, including they have jealousy and envy and things of that nature as well, right? So Joseph had a dream, and when he told it to his brothers, they hated him all the more. He said to them, listen to this dream I had. We were binding sheaves of grain out in the field when suddenly my sheaf rose and stood upright, and your sheaves gathered around mine and bowed down to it. So this is really a slap in the face, because obviously the way that inheritance and birthrights were handed down, it was the eldest first. Certainly the youngest of 12 is not even in the line. It's not even in the line. And yet he's saying, hey, look, you're all going to serve me. That's what this dream is. I had this dream. Now, why he would even tell his brothers that, I have no idea, but it's recorded here. So he did so. And his brothers' hate and jealousy grew even greater. Okay. His brother said to him, do you intend to reign over us? Will you actually rule us? And they hated him all the more because of his dream and what he had said. So he's not in good stead here with the other 11. Then he had another dream. And not learning from that first dream, he tells them this dream as well. And he told it to his brothers. He says, listen, I've had another dream, and this time the sun and the moon and 11 stars were bowing down to me. That's mother, father, and 11 brothers. So that is Israel himself, right? And Leah, probably, because Leah's still alive. Okay? So, wow, that's very audacious, extremely audacious to do that. When he told his father as well as his brothers, his father, Israel, actually rebukes him, saying, what is this dream you had? Will your mother and I and your brothers actually come and and bow down to the ground before you? It's a big deal, right? It's like, it's very offensive to Israel and to his brothers. His brothers were even more jealous of him, but his father kept the matter in mind. Now, I looked that up to find out what does that mean, kept the matter in mind. Well, scholars believe that when you look at what the father is doing, he's remembering this when he has to journey to Egypt, and he actually meets Joseph when he is the ruler of Egypt. So he remembers this then, and they equate it to the prophecies that were given to Mary and Joseph when Christ was born that she later recalls. So there are some similarities there in the gathering of the knowledge. So Joseph, being in such bad stead with his brothers, is now going to be sold into slavery. Now his brothers had gone to graze their flocks near Shechem, and Israel said to Joseph, as you know, your brothers are grazing the flocks near Shechem. Come, I'm going to send you to them. Very well, he replies. So he said to him, go and see if all is well with your brothers and with the flocks, and bring word back to me. Then he sent him off from the valley of Hebron. When Joseph arrived at Shechem, a man found him wandering around in the fields and asked him, what are you looking for? He replied, I'm looking for my brothers. Can you tell me where they are grazing their flocks? They have moved on from here, the man answered. I heard them say, let's go to Dathan. So Joseph went after his brothers and found them near Dathan, but they saw him in a distance, and before he reached them, they plotted to kill him. So this was a murder plot to begin with. Again, talking about the 11 fathers of the nation of Israel are plotting to kill the youngest brother Joseph because of the jealousies they had of him and the dreams that he had told them about. So here comes that dreamer, they said to each other. Come now, let's kill him and throw him into one of these cisterns and say that a ferocious animal devoured him. Then we'll see what comes of his dreams. Wow. So, it's just being able to see that even men of high holy standard in the holy word of God do really unrighteous things. They're plotting to murder their brother. Okay. So again, God's working through unrighteous men to fulfill his covenant. That's exactly what he does. Then Reuben heard this. He tried to rescue him from their hands. Let's not take his life, he said. Don't shed any blood. Throw him into the cistern there in the desert, but don't lay a hand on him. Reuben said this to rescue him from them and to take him back to his father. So Reuben had good intentions, but they were to come to naught. So when Joseph came to his brothers, they stripped him of his robe, the richly ornamented robe he was wearing, and they took him and threw him into the cistern. Now the cistern was empty. There was no water in it. Obviously, a cistern is a well. It's just a deep well, and there's no water here, so they toss him into this well after removing his coat. As they sat down to eat their meal, and again, isn't that crazy? Here we have, they just threw their younger brother, who they were going to kill. Now they just threw him down a well. I'm sure that wasn't any great thing for Joseph. And then they sit down to have a meal. Just like, just another day. As they sat down to eat their meal, they looked up and saw a caravan of Ishmaelites coming from Gilead. Their camels were loaded with spices and balm and myrrh, and they were on their way to take them down to Egypt. So they're heading into another pagan nation, Egypt, a nation of great power. Judah said to his brothers, what will we gain if we kill our brother and cover up his blood? Come, let us sell him to the Ishmaelites and not lay our hands on him. After all, he is our brother, our own flesh and blood. His brothers agreed. I love that line. After all, he's our brother, our own flesh and blood. Let's sell him. We don't have to kill him. Let's just sell him. We'll make a little money off the deal, It's very, very nice of Judah.
Probably had enough of the little squirt by now.
Very, I'm sure they did. So when the Midianite merchants came by, his brothers pulled Joseph up out of the cistern and sold him for 20 shekels of silver to the Ishmaelites, who took him to Egypt. When Reuben returned to the cistern, he saw that Joseph was not there. He tore his clothes. He went back to his brothers and said, the boy isn't there. Where can I turn now? Apparently, Reuben wasn't there when they sold him into slavery, and Reuben had intended to take him back to Israel, but now the boy's gone. Then they got Joseph's robe, slaughtered a goat, and dipped the robe in the blood. They took the ornamented robe back to the father and said, we found this, examine it to see whether it is your son's robe. Wow, really? He recognized it and said, it is my son's robe. Some ferocious animal has devoured him, and Joseph has surely been torn to pieces. Jacob then tears his clothes, put on sackcloth, and mourned for his son for many days. All his sons and daughters came to comfort him, but he refused to be comforted. No, he said, in mourning I go down to the grave to my son. So my father wept for him. So his father wept for him. So he's very distraught. Meanwhile, the Midianites sold Joseph in Egypt to Potiphar, one of the Pharaoh's officials, the captain of the guard. So he's a man of management in the court of the Pharaoh. He's the captain of the guard, and he sells them. He's sold into his service. And Judah and Tamar, this is chapter 38. At that time, Judah left his brothers and went down to stay with a man of Adullam named Hira. There, Judah met the daughter of a Canaanite man named Shua. He married her and lay with her, and she became pregnant and gave birth to a son who was named She conceived again and gave birth to a son and named him Onan. She gave birth to still another son and named him Shelah. It was at Kezib that she gave birth to him. Judah got a wife for his firstborn, and her name was Tamar. But Judah's firstborn, was wicked in the Lord's sight, so the Lord put him to death. Wow, okay. And Judah said to Onan, lie with your brother's wife and fulfill your duty. That is protocol. So if the husband of a brother's wife died, it was the brother's responsibility to take that woman as his wife. So this was protocol. Lie with your brother's wife and fulfill your duty to her as a brother-in-law to produce offspring for your brother, to keep the line going. But Onan knew that the offspring would not be his, so whenever he lay with his brother's wife, he spilled his semen on the ground to keep from producing offspring for his brother. What he did was wicked in the Lord's sight, so he put him to death also. This is a great little sidebar that we're seeing here, and it's evidence of how twisted life was even then in these families, for sure. Judah then said to his daughter-in-law Tamar, live as a widow in your father's house until my son Shelah grows up, for he thought he may die too, just like his brothers. So Tamar went to live in his father's house. After a long time, Judah's wife, the daughter of Shua, died. When Judah had recovered from his grief, he went up to Timnah to the men who were shearing his sheep, and his friend Hira and Dolamite went with him. When Tamar was told, your father-in-law is on his way to Timnah to shear his sheep, she took off her widow's clothes, covered herself with a veil to disguise herself, and then sat down on the entrance to Enam, which is on the road to Timnah. For she saw that through Shelah had now grown up, she had not been given to him as a wife. So she's plotting to get pregnant to continue the line. That's what we're seeing here. When Judah saw her, he thought she was a prostitute, for she had covered her face, not realizing that she was his brother-in-law. He went over to her by the roadside and said, come now, let me sleep with you. So apparently you need a little comfort. And what will you give me to sleep with you? She asked. I'll send you a young goat from my flock, he said. Will you give me something as a pledge until you send it? She asked. He said, what pledge should I give you? Your seal and your cord and the staff in your hand, she answered. So he gave them to her and slept with her, and she became pregnant by him. And after she left, she took off her veil and put on her widow's clothes again. Meanwhile, Judah sent the young goat by his friend to the Dolamanite in order to get his pledge back from the woman, but he did not find her. He asked the men who lived there, where is the shrine prostitute who was beside the road at Enam? There hasn't been any shrine prostitute here, they said. So he went back to Judah and said, I didn't find her. Besides, the men who lived there said there hasn't been a shrine prostitute here. Then Judah said, let her keep what she has, or we will become a laughingstock. After all, I did not send her this young goat, but you didn't find her. I did send her this young goat, but you didn't find her. About 3 months later, Judah was told, your daughter-in-law, Tamar, is guilty of prostitution. As a result, she is now pregnant. Judah said, bring her out and have her burned to death. Boy, this is really crazy stuff that we're reading here. As she was being brought out, she sent a message to her father-in-law. I am pregnant by the man who owns these, she said, and she added, see if you recognize whose seal and cord and staff these are. Oh boy. Judah recognized them, of course, and said, she is more righteous than I, since I wouldn't give her to my son Shelah, and he did not sleep with her again. When the time came for her to give birth, there were twin boys in her womb. As she was giving birth, one of them put out his hand. So the midwife took a scarlet thread and tied it on his wrist and said, "This one came out first." But when he drew back his hand, his brother came out. And she said, "So this is how and he was named Perez. Then his brother, who had the scarlet thread on his wrist, came out, and he was given the name Zerah." So, wow. All right, so that's kind of a sidebar to Joseph being sold to Potiphar's wife, but it will have meaning later. So we just have to see how things progress in a very unrighteous way in a very holy family. Okay? Joseph and Potiphar's wife. So we're back to Joseph. He's gone into Egypt. He's been sold to Potiphar, who is the captain of the guards in the court of the Pharaoh. And his brothers have gone back home and told Israel that Joseph is in fact dead. Okay? So Joseph is out of the lives of Israel and his 11 brothers and his 2 sisters. So in 39, Joseph, who had been taken to Egypt, Potiphar, an Egyptian who was one of the Pharaoh's officials, the captain of the guard, brought him from the Ishmaelites and had taken him there. The Lord was with Joseph, and he prospered, and he lived in the house of his Egyptian master. When the master saw that the Lord was with him, and that the Lord gave him success in everything he did, Joseph found favor in the eyes and became his attendant. This is very, very similar to exactly what Jacob or Israel had done with Laban. When Laban put him into the field for those 7 years so he could marry Rachel, right? And then he tricked him with Leah. Everything prospered. He became very wealthy, and he wanted to keep him. So he held Rachel back and then gave Jacob Rachel as his wife, and he stayed another 7 years. So again, God was with Israel or Jacob, and God is also with Joseph very much here, right? And he's prospering, to the extent that Potiphar put him in charge of his entire household. So he is over all the servants in the household. He is the head butler, if you will, and he entrusted to his care everything he owned. So Joseph is in charge of the whole gamut, right? And he's a Jewish servant who was a slave that was sold to Potiphar. From the time he put him in charge of his household and of all he owned, the Lord blessed the household of the Egyptian because of Joseph. The blessing of the Lord was on everything Potiphar had, both in the house and in the field. So he left in Joseph's care everything he had. With Joseph in charge, he did not concern himself with anything except the food he ate. Joseph handled everything, the whole ball of wax. Now Joseph was well built and handsome, and after a while, his master's wife took notice of Joseph and said, "Come to bed with me." Now they didn't have TV and stuff. It was very limited entertainment value, so they had to go with what they had, I guess. So there was a lot of this going on, but Potiphar's wife, she wanted him to sleep with her. But Joseph, being a righteous guy, says, but he refused. "With me in charge," he told her, "my master does not concern himself with anything in the house. Everything he owns, he has entrusted to my care. No one is greater in this house than I am. My master has withheld nothing from me except you, because you are his wife. How then could I do such a wicked thing and sin against God?" You notice that it's not against Potiphar that he's concerned about, but he's concerned about sinning against God. That's his concern here. So he refuses her. And though she spoke to Joseph day after day, he refused to go to bed with her or even to be with her. So he would exit the room when she would come in. He would avoid her. He did not want to be tempted, and secondarily, he didn't want to be put into a bad situation. So one day he went into the house to attend his duties, and none of the household servants was inside. She caught him by the cloak and said, "Come to bed with me." But he left his cloak in her hand and ran out of the house. So basically the cloak comes off and he runs naked out of the house to avoid having to go to bed with her. And she's had enough of this, by the way. When she saw that he had left his cloak in her hand and had run out of the house, she called her household servants. "Look," she said to them, "this Hebrew has been brought to us to make sport of us. He came in here to sleep with me, but I screamed. When he heard me scream for help, he left his cloak beside me and ran out of the house." So she's accusing him of trying to rape her. Okay? When his master heard this story, his wife told him, saying, "This is how your slave treated me." He burned with anger. Joseph's master took him and put him in prison, the place where the king's prisoners were confined. Now, it's interesting to note that we've seen now from Joseph a couple of pretty horrific events take place. The first event was his brothers throwing him into a well, then dragging him out of the well and selling him to merchants that were going to Egypt, then being sold into slavery to Potiphar and put in charge of his, and all this time, and then being accused of rape by Potiphar's wife. All this time, we don't read anything in here about woe is me, or why are you doing this to me, or what is the deal here. What we do see is a very faithful servant, not to Potiphar, but to God, because he stands in his faith despite whatever may come. So God is, quote unquote, with him, and he prospers, right? Even though he gets thrown into prison. But while Joseph was there in prison, the Lord was with him. Again, the Lord was with him. You know, the Lord's with us too, by the way, every day. We might not recognize it, and we may falter, but the Lord is with us every single day. And that is something that when you truly understand, believe, and live that out, you find true peace through doing that. The Lord is with us every single day. So the Lord shows him kindness because he is with him, and he granted him favor in the eyes of the prison warden. So the warden put Joseph in charge of all those held in prison, and he was made responsible for all that was done there. He's basically in charge of the prison now. Okay? So terrible things happening to him, no matter where they put him, no matter what the consequences are from man. Joseph is blessed, and he is established as a man of God. The Lord paid no attention to anything under Joseph's care because the Lord was with Joseph and gave him success in whatever he did. The cupbearer and the baker. So this is chapter 40. Sometime later, the cupbearers and the baker of the king of Egypt offended their master, and the king of Egypt, Pharaoh, was angry with his two officials, the chief cupbearer and the chief baker, and he put them in custody in the house of the captain of the guard, in the same prison where Joseph was confined. The captain of the guard assigned them to Joseph, and he attended them. After they had been in custody for some time, each of the two men, the cupbearer and the baker of the king of Egypt, who were being held in the prison, had a dream the same night, and each dream had a meaning of its own. When Joseph came to them the next morning, he saw that they were dejected. So he asked Pharaoh's officials who were in custody with him in his master's house, "Why are your faces so sad today?" "We both had dreams," they answered, "but there's no one to interpret them." Then Joseph said to them, and I love this response, okay, because it could have been very, very different. Joseph says to them, "Do not interpretations belong to God? Tell me your dreams." So he's telling them right there and then that it's not he who interprets the dream, it's God, if he so wills. Right? That again, faith-based, truly faith-based. So the chief cupbearer told Joseph his dream. He said to him, "In my dream I saw a vine in front of me, and on the vine there were 3 branches. As soon as it budded, it bloomed, and its clusters ripened into grapes. Pharaoh's cup was in my hand, and I took the grapes and squeezed them into the Pharaoh's cup and put the cup in his hand." "What does this mean?" "This is what it means," Joseph said to him. "The 3 branches are 3 days. Within 3 days, Pharaoh will Pharaoh will lift up your head and restore you to your position, and you will put Pharaoh's cup in his hand, just as he used to when you were his cupbearer. But when all goes well with you, remember me and show me kindness. Mention me to the Pharaoh, and so that I may get out of prison." Okay, so he says, here's the dream. It comes from God. Here's your interpretation of this dream. It comes from God. You're going to be restored in 3 days. And when you are, can you do me the kindness of remembering me to the Pharaoh so I can be released from this prison? "For I was forcibly carried off from the land of the Hebrews, and even here I have done nothing to deserve being put in a dungeon." But there he sits. When the chief baker saw that Joseph had given a favorable interpretation, he said to Joseph, "I'm next. I too had a dream. On my head there were 3 baskets of bread. In the top basket were all kinds of baked goods for Pharaoh, but the birds were eating them out of the basket on my head. This is what it means," Joseph said. "The 3 baskets are 3 days. Within 3 days, Pharaoh will lift off your head and hang you on a tree, and the birds will eat away your flesh." It's interesting to note that he doesn't mince words, at least. So this is the baker's interpretation, and I'm sure it didn't go well. Now that 3rd day was Pharaoh's birthday, and he gave a feast for all his officials. He lifted up the heads of the chief cupbearer and the chief baker in the presence of the officials. He restored the chief cupbearer to his position, so that he once again put the cup into the Pharaoh's hand, but he hanged the chief baker just as Joseph had said to them in his interpretation. But note, the chief cupbearer, however, did not remember Joseph. He forgot him completely. No mention of the dream, no mention of the interpretation, and certainly no mention of Joseph. So Pharaoh's dreams. So full 2 years go by after this, and Joseph is still in the dungeon. Okay? When 2 full years had passed, Pharaoh had a dream. He was standing by the Nile, when out of the river came up 7 cows, sleek and fat, and they grazed among the reeds. After them, 7 other cows, ugly and gaunt, came up out of the Nile and stood beside those on the riverbank. And the cows that were ugly and gaunt ate up the 7 sleek, fat cows. Then Pharaoh woke up. Now, that's a pretty weird dream. He fell asleep again, and he had a second dream. 7 heads of grain, healthy and good, were growing on a single stalk. After them, 7 other heads of grain sprouted, thin and scorched by the east wind. The thin heads of grain swallowed up the 7 healthy, full heads. Then Pharaoh woke up. It had only been a dream. In the morning, his mind was troubled. So he sent for all his magicians and the wise men of Egypt. Pharaoh told them in his dreams, but no one could interpret them for him. Then the chief cupbearer said to the Pharaoh, "Shazam! Today I am reminded of my shortcomings. Pharaoh was once angry with his servants, and he imprisoned me and the chief baker in the house of the captain of the guard. Each of us had a dream the same night, and each dream had a meaning of its own. Now a young Hebrew was there with us, a servant of the captain of the guard. We took him our dreams, and he interpreted them for us, giving each man the interpretation of his dream. and things turned out exactly as he interpreted them to us. I was restored to my position, and the other man was hanged. So Pharaoh sent for Joseph, and he was quickly brought from the dungeon. When he had shaved and changed his clothes, he came before Pharaoh. And Pharaoh said to Joseph, I had a dream, but no one can interpret it. But I have heard it said of you that when you hear a dream, you can interpret it. Love this response, guys. Love this response. I cannot do it. Joseph replied to Pharaoh, but God will give Pharaoh the answer he desires. Again, he's been in that dungeon for I don't know how many years, certainly 2 years beyond when he had told the cupbearer to give Pharaoh the news about his abilities, and yet he's still faithful to the one true God, right? He doesn't take credit for being able to interpret this dream. No. He says, I can't do it. I'm not, this isn't from me, but my God can do it. My God can do this. The Pharaoh said to Joseph, in my dream I was standing on the bank of the Nile, when out of the river there came up 7 cows, fat and sleek, and they grazed among the reeds. After them 7 other cows came up, scrawny and very ugly and lean. I had never seen such ugly cows in all the land of Egypt. The lean, ugly cows ate up the 7 fat cows that came up first. But even after they ate them, no one could tell that they had what they had done. So they looked just as ugly as before. Then I woke up. In my dreams also, I saw 7 heads of grain, full and good, growing on a single stalk. After them, 7 other heads sprouted, withered and thin and scorched by the east wind. The thin heads of grain swallowed up the 7 good heads. I told this to the magicians, but none could explain it to me. Then Joseph said to the Pharaoh, the dreams of Pharaoh are one and the same. God has revealed to Pharaoh what he is about to do. The 7 good cows are 7 good years, and the 7 good heads of grain are 7 years. It is one and the same dream. The 7 lean, ugly cows that come up after are 7 years, and so are the 7 worthless heads of grain scorched by the east wind. They are 7 years of famine. It is just as I have said to the Pharaoh. God has shown Pharaoh what he is about to do. 7 years of great abundance are coming throughout the land of Egypt, but 7 years of famine will follow them. Then all the abundance in Egypt will be forgotten, and the famine will ravage the land. The abundance in the land will not be remembered, because the famine that follows will be so severe. The reason the dream is given to Pharaoh in 2 forms is that the matter has been firmly decided by God, and God will do it soon. And now let Pharaoh look for a discerning and wise man and put him in charge of the land of Egypt. Let Pharaoh appoint commissioners over the land to take 1/5 of the harvest of Egypt during the 7 years of abundance. They should collect all the food of these good years that are coming and store up the grain under the authority of Pharaoh to be kept in the cities for food. This food should be held in reserve for the country to be used during the 7 years of famine that will be upon Egypt, so that the country may not be ruined by the famine. The plan seemed so good to the Pharaoh and to all his officials. So Pharaoh asked them, can we find anyone like this man? One in whom is the Spirit of God? The Pharaoh said to Joseph, since God has made all this known to you, there is no one so discerning and wise as you. You shall be in charge of my palace, and all my people are to submit to your orders. Only with respect to the throne will I be greater than you. That is incredible. We have a Hebrew slave, okay? Hebrew, not a pagan, Hebrew slave with a foreign god, okay, that comes in, and because he makes such an impression on the Pharaoh of Egypt, who himself considers himself, by the way, God, as a pagan, he so impresses him that he puts him in charge of his kingdom. He is second only in authority to the Pharaoh. That is astounding. That's an astounding event that can only be put into place by the divine hand of God. There is no other way that that would happen. So Joseph is now in charge of Egypt, right? So Pharaoh said to Joseph, I hereby put you in charge of the whole land of Egypt. It's amazing. Then Pharaoh took his signet ring from his finger and put it on Joseph's finger. From his finger and put it on Joseph's finger. He dressed him in robes of fine linen and put a gold chain around his neck. He had him ride in a chariot as his second in command, and men shouted before him, make way. Thus he was put in charge of the whole land of Egypt. From slave in a dungeon to second in command of the entire nation of Egypt.
It was like the second time, really.
It's unbelievable.
With Potiphar, he was the number 2 guy.
Potiphar, absolutely, but he was cast down and then brought back up again. And all the while, he stayed faithful, and because of his faith, God blessed him. And of course, God is working through Joseph very much so, and his brothers, for the lineage of Christ. Joseph is directly in the genealogy of Christ, right? Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, I am Pharaoh, but without your word no one will lift hand or foot in Egypt. Pharaoh gave Joseph the name he should have just left it as Joseph. The name Zephanah, and gave him Asenia, daughter of Potipharah, priest of On, to be his wife. And Joseph went throughout the land of Egypt. So he is now officially an Egyptian, but he is not serving pagan gods. He's still faithful to the God of Abraham. Joseph was 30 years old when he entered the service of Pharaoh, king of Egypt. And Joseph went out from Pharaoh's presence and traveled throughout Egypt. During the 7 years of abundance, the land produced plentifully. Joseph collected all the food produced in those 7 years of abundance in Egypt and stored it in the cities. In each city, he put the food grown in the fields surrounding it. Joseph stored up huge quantities of grain, like the sand of the sea. So it was so much that he stopped keeping records because it was beyond measure. Before the years of famine came, 2 sons were born to Joseph by Asenia, daughter of Potiphar, priest of On. Joseph named the firstborn Manasseh, and he said, it is because God has made me forget all of my trouble and all my father's household. The second son he named Ephraim, and said, it is because God has made me fruitful in the land of my suffering. The 7 years of abundance in Egypt came to an end, and the 7 years of famine began, just as Joseph had said. There was famine in all the other lands, but in the whole land of Egypt there was food. So in all these lands that encircled Egypt, all these other nations were in a famine, right? No food was being produced. And Egypt was fine. When all Egypt began to feel the famine, the people cried to Pharaoh for food, and Pharaoh told the Egyptians, go to Joseph and do what he tells you. When the famine had spread over the whole country, Joseph opened the storehouses and sold grain to the Egyptians, for the famine was severe throughout Egypt. And all the countries came to Egypt to buy grain from Joseph because the famine was severe in all the world. So they had enough grain to supply not only themselves, which they sold, makes sense, and they also sold it to the nations surrounding them. Joseph's brothers go to Egypt. Remember, Joseph's brothers are on the outskirts of Egypt, right? So they're amidst a famine. They have no food. When Jacob learned that there was grain in Egypt, he said to his sons, why do you just keep looking at each other? I have heard that there is grain in Egypt. Go down there and buy some for us so that we may live and not die. Do something. Let's go. Get it on. Then 10 of Joseph's brothers went down to buy grain from Egypt, but Jacob did not send Benjamin, Joseph's brother, with the others because he was afraid that harm might come to him. So Israel's sons were among those who went to buy grain, for the famine was in the land of Canaan also. So there was obviously fear of going to a pagan ruler to buy grain, that the sons may be imprisoned and or never return. And so he withholds Benjamin from the 11. So 10 go in. Now Joseph was the governor of the land. He's second in charge, the one who sold grain to all the people. So he's the guy that people would come in to say, hey, I want to buy grain for my family or my nation or my county or whatever it may be. And Joseph makes that decision as to A, how much it's going to cost, and B, how much they're going to get. Right? He's the guy. He's the governor of the land. So the one who sold grain to all its people. So when Joseph's brothers arrived, hey, guess what? They bowed down to him with their faces to the ground. Dream number one, right? As soon as Joseph saw his brothers, he recognized them, but he pretended to be a stranger and spoke harshly to them. Where do you come from? He asked. From the land of Canaan, they replied, to buy food. Although Joseph recognized his brothers, they don't recognize him. He's an Egyptian. He looks like, dresses like he's royalty, right? He's no longer in shepherd's clothes. He's no longer in that multicolored cloak that his father Jacob had made him. Then he remembered his dreams about them and said to them, you are spies. You have come to see where our land is unprotected. This is what Jacob fears, quite frankly. No, my lord, they answered, your servants have come to buy food. We are all the sons of one man. Your servants are honest men, not spies. No, he said to them, you have come to see where my land is unprotected. But they replied, your servants were 12 brothers, the sons of one man who lives in the land of Canaan. The youngest is now with our father, and one is no more. Oops. Joseph says to them, it is just as you told me, you are spies. And this is how you will be tested. As surely as Pharaoh lives, you will not leave this place unless your youngest brother comes here. Send one of your number to get your brother. The rest of you will be kept in prison, so that your words may be tested to see if they are telling the truth. If you are telling the truth. If you are not, then as surely as Pharaoh lives, you are spies, and he will put them all in custody for 3 days. And he put them into custody. So he's sending one back to get Benjamin, which is going to break Jacob's heart, okay? Because the other 9 are imprisoned. And the only way to get them out is to send Benjamin to prove that they aren't spies. So it's a pretty wicked plan, but it is what it is. On the 3rd day, Joseph said to them, do this and you will live, for I fear God. If you are honest men, let one of your brothers stay here in prison while the rest of you go and take grain back to your starving household. So he's going to send 9 of them back with grain. But you must bring your youngest brother to me so that your words may be verified and that you may not die. This they proceeded to do. They said to one another, surely we are being punished because of our brother. We saw how distressed he was when he pleaded with us for his life, but we would not listen. That's why this distress has come upon us. So they're remembering Joseph now. They don't know who they stood in front of yet, but they're saying this calamity has befallen us because of what we did to Joseph. It's our punishment. So Reuben replies, didn't I tell you not to sin against the boy? But you wouldn't listen. Now we must give an accounting for his blood. They did not realize that Joseph could understand them since he was using an interpreter. So Joseph's listening into this whole conversation. He turned away from them and began to weep. But then he turned back and spoke to them again. He had Simon taken from them and bound before their eyes. Joseph's overwhelmed emotionally, as he would be. I mean, so we're talking about a time, wow, so it's a minimum of 14, it's probably, we're talking about 16, 17, maybe 17, 18 years between the time that he was sold into slavery until now. So this was, it could have been 17, 18 years ago that his brothers had betrayed him. Joseph gave orders to fill their bags with grain, to put each man's silver back for their journey. After this was done for them, they loaded their grain on their donkeys and left. At the place where they stopped for the night, one of them opened a sack to get feed for his donkey, and he saw his silver in the mouth of the sack. "My silver has been returned," he said to his brothers. "Here it is in my sack." Their hearts sank, and they turned to each other trembling, saying, "What is this that God has done to us?" That silver was to pay for the grain, and now it's back in their sack, which means that they haven't paid for the grain, and that the interpretation is they stole the silver, right? When they came to their father Jacob in the land of Canaan, they told him all that had happened to them. They said, "The man who is Lord over the land spoke harshly with us and treated us as though we were spying on the land. But we said to him, 'We are honest men. We are not spies. We were 12 brothers, sons of one father. One is no more, and the youngest is now with our father in Canaan.' Then the man who is the Lord over the land said to us, 'This is how I will know whether you are honest men. Leave one of your brothers here with me and take food for your starving households and go. But bring your youngest brother to me so I will know that you are not spies but honest men. Then I will give your brother back to you and you can trade in the land.' As they were emptying their sacks, there in each man's sack was his pouch of silver. When they and their father saw the money pouches, they were frightened. Their father Jacob said to them, 'You have deprived me of my children. Joseph is no more, and Simon is no more, and now you want to take Benjamin. Everything is against me.' Then Reuben said to his father, 'You may put both of your sons to death if I do not bring him back to you. Entrust him to my care, and I will bring him back.' But Jacob said, 'My son will not go down there with you. His brother is dead, and he is the only one left. If harm comes to him on the journey you are taking, you will bring my gray head down to the grave in sorrow.' So Jacob's resisting because he fears for the life of Benjamin and Simon, and Joseph is supposedly dead. So here we go to the second, we don't have much time, but we're going to venture into this a little bit. The second journey to Egypt in chapter 43. Now the famine was still severe in the land, so when they had eaten all the grain, notice they didn't go right back. They ate the grain that they had first, okay? So when they had eaten all the grain they had brought from Egypt, their father said to them, 'Go back and buy us a little more food.' But Judah said to him, 'The man warned us solemnly, you will not see my face again unless your brother is with you. If you will send our brother along with us, we will go down and buy food for you. But if you will not send him, we will not go down, because the man said to you, you will not see my face again unless your brother is with you.' And Israel asked, 'Why did you bring this trouble on me by telling the man you had another brother?' They replied, 'The man questioned us closely about ourselves and our family. 'Is your father still living?' He asked us. 'Do you have another brother?' We simply answered his question. How were we to know he would say, 'Bring your brother down here'? Then Judah said to Israel, his father, 'Send the boy along with me, and we will go at once, so that we and you and our children may live and not die. I myself will guarantee his safety. You can hold me personally responsible for him. If I do not bring him back to you and set him here before you, I will bear the blame before you all my life. As it is, if we had not delayed, we could have gone and returned twice. But of course, they delayed out of fear. Then his father Israel said to them, if it must be done, then do this. But some of the best products of the land in your bags, and take them down to the man as a gift, a little balm, and a little honey, some spices and myrrh, and some pistachio nuts and almonds. Take double the amount of silver with you, for you must return the silver that was put back into the mouths of your sacks. Perhaps it was a mistake. Take your brother also and go back to the man at once. And may God Almighty grant you mercy before the man, so that he will let your other brother and Benjamin come back with you. As for me, I am bereaved. I am bereaved. So the men took the gifts and doubled the amount of silver, and Benjamin also, and they hurried back down to Egypt and presented themselves to Joseph. They must have been shaken in their boots. When Joseph saw Benjamin with them, he said to the steward of his house, take these men to my house, slaughter an animal, and prepare dinner. They are to eat with me at noon. The man did as Joseph had told him, and took the men to Joseph's house. Now the men were frightened when they were taken to his house. They thought, we were brought here because of the silver that was put back into the sacks the first time, and he wants to attack us and overpower us and seize us as slaves and take our donkeys. So they went up to Joseph's steward and spoke to him at the entrance of the house. Please, sir, they said, we came down here the first time to buy food, but at the place where we stopped for the night, we opened our sacks, and each of us found his silver, the exact weight, in the mouth of his sack. So we have brought it back with us. We have also brought additional silver with us to buy food. We don't know who put our silver in our sacks. It is all right, he said. Don't be afraid. Your God, the God of your father, has given you treasure in your sacks. I received your silver. Then he brought Simon out to them. The steward took the men into Joseph's house, gave them water to wash their feet, and provided fodder for their donkeys. They prepared their gifts for Joseph's arrival at noon because they had heard that they were to eat there. When Joseph came home, they presented to him the gifts they had brought into the house, and they bowed down before him to the ground. He asked them how they were, and they said, how is your aged father you told me about? Is he still living? And they replied, your servant, our father, is still alive and well. And they bowed down low to pay him honor. As he looked about and saw his brother Benjamin, his own mother's son, he asked, is this your youngest brother, the one you told me about? And he said, God be gracious to you, my son. Deeply moved at the sight of his brother, Joseph hurried out and looked for a place to weep. He went into his private room and wept there. After he had washed his face, he came out and, controlling himself, said, serve the food. They served him by himself, the brothers by themselves, and the Egyptians who ate with them by themselves, because the Egyptians could not eat with the Hebrews, for that is detestable to Egyptians. They don't like the foreigners. They consider them much lower than.
But he's a foreigner.
Yes, but he is second in charge. So the men who had seated before him in the order of their ages, from the firstborn to the youngest, and they looked at each other in astonishment. When portions were served to them from Joseph's table, Benjamin's portion was 5 times as much as anyone else's. So they feasted and drank freely with him. All right, so I'm going to leave it at that. We're going to look at chapter 44 next week. We are quickly, and I say that kind of with a smirk on my face, but we are moving toward Exodus, which is really going to be quite an adventure as we look through Exodus and the things that were taking place within the land at that time to bring about all of the signs that God had prepared for the Exodus of Egypt from slavery. So that's going to be exciting stuff. So I hope that you'll all be able to come back. let's close with a quick prayer.
There's a prayer request.
Oh, yes, please.
Bob Watson, good evening, from Bob and Terry. Please include prayer for our nephew Troy, who lives in California and is recovering from a stroke.
Definitely will. Troy, absolutely. If there are any other prayer requests, send them to Carolyn now or just post them and I will include them. We'll give a minute for that. Okay, so Lord, we come to you on bended knee. We come knowing that despite all of our efforts, we could never fully comprehend your perfection and your love, Lord, for us as you designed us to be specifically in relationship with you in your image. And I pray, Father, that we will humble ourselves before you, knowing that your will be done in all situations, all circumstances, no matter what the world may throw at us, no matter what the circumstance that we might find ourselves in, holding fast to you, to your Son, Jesus Christ, who was sent in the flesh to live, die, and rise again, to pay the price for our sins in his blood so that we may be reconnected with you here in this world and for eternity. I pray, Father, that we will always remember and keep this close to our thoughts, words, and deeds so that we may shine the light of Christ onto all that we meet and that we ourselves and our families may be blessed. I pray special prayers tonight for Troy, who has suffered a heart attack. And I pray, Lord, that you will be, especially in these times of isolation and this virus, that you will be with the doctors and the nurses, that you will guide their hands and their orders and instructions so that Troy may fully recover from this calamity, and that he may be healed, and that you will be recognized in that healing, Father, so that others will see that miracles still happen. They happen all the time for those who believe and have eyes to see. So I pray, Lord, that he will be brought back to full health rapidly, Father. I pray for all of those that are with us and our families that are currently suffering from any type of physical distress or illness. I pray for Amisi. I pray for my wife and her shoulder. I pray that would heal as well. I pray for Frank, that he may be healed and that his pain in his neck may subside, Lord. I pray for all these things, Lord, and if it is your will, make them happen. If it is your will that they do not happen, may we not lose our faith and our love for you as you have never lost your faith and love for us, Father. So I pray that you will be with us throughout the next week and that you will return us all safely, Lord, next Thursday. Pray this in the name of Jesus. Amen. Good night, folks. Any others?